All right, so I'm here with Madison. Madison is interning with me. Madison is a PhD in IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology. And so I'm going to come back to you well, I want to show you something, Madison. And then I want to, what I'm going to show you is something I think I'd like to ask Nellie to help us work on. So that's what I'm going after here. And it has to do with StrengthsFinder. So ultimately what I want to see happen is, this is about connecting StrengthsFinder to our overall work, to the 3 principles. So let me just back up. Let me go to our models, my first board. That's probably the one I think I want. Tools for thriving. Let's do that. All right. So everything relates to these 3 principles here. Everything we do. So I want to say that. Now what I want to do is I want to relate StrengthsFinder to this. So I've mapped it out over here a little bit. So in our model, and this we'll cover this more somewhere else, I guess, if anybody needs some refresher. But the idea is we want to achieve outcomes. Outcomes are the things we want. It's why we do what we do, to get outcomes. Outcomes could be food. Outcomes could be love. Those are probably 2 of the main outcomes that any creature strives for. Food and procreation, or community, or you know, something like that, a troop, or whatever, the animals, flock, you know, all that, strength in numbers. So we're always striving for outcomes, and then we would just need to fill in what those are. And they could be very broad and big and sweeping, or very narrow and small. But here's what I do know. It doesn't matter the outcomes. It varies from situation to situation. What I know is that in order to achieve any outcome, it's going to require the performance of activity. Human activity is how we produce outcomes. Activity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty basic. In fact, like it's the same thing. It's basic, everything I talk about, but not obvious. But useful. Bonobo, a bit, yeah. But useful, and relevant. And relevant. So, a bonobuar. Okay? So it's just basic. But we don't think about it that way. We just want the outcomes, and then we just do whatever instinctually comes to us to get those outcomes. We don't really think about it that much, whether it's on an individual level, a team level, or an organizational level. But here's something. The best organizations and teams and individuals, they know which activities to perform. So it's about the right activity and performing it at the right level. You need both. You need to perform the activity, and you need to perform it at the right level in order to get your desired outcomes. And if you don't get your desired outcomes, that's not meant to be a B, that's meant to be a D. Then it could only mean there's a couple of possibilities of what that could mean, Madison. I'm going to actually quiz you. I'll put you on the spot. What might be some of the reasons why you didn't achieve your desired outcomes?
You were not performing the right activity.
Or
you were not performing it at the right level.
Usually it's only those 2 things. So a lot of times there's a lot of activities we don't even think to perform. They're not in our repertoire. Just like we have a vocabulary of words, we also have a vocabulary of activities we could perform. You know, it's like if you drive to work the same way all the time, but then one day you go to a different route, and then you're like, oh, this route might be better. You've now added another route to your repertoire, and maybe sometimes you go one route for some reasons and another route for the other. And then maybe another time you discover a new route. And so that's what life is like. We add new moves to our repertoire, But a lot of times people stop learning. But that's another tangent. But it's about the right activity and then performing it at the right level. And so we have a model, and I won't go searching for it now because this is meant to be kind of short. But the model is our ladder of performance. Have I showed this to you? It's basically in every activity, there's different levels at which you could perform it. And the most, there's the level at which you don't even know it's an activity. And this comes from a mentor of mine named Marcia Schenk, and I've adapted this from her. It's a really wonderful model. But she says in any activity, or she calls them domains, but I'm using the word activity. She says you could be oblivious. You don't even know it exists, right? But then you learn the activity exists, so you become inept. You graduate. You're no better at the activity, but at least you know it exists now, and you have a choice. You could stay inept, which is like you're fixed in your mindset. You're fixed in your way you're going to grow. You're not open to growing. You don't think you can. It doesn't interest you. Or with some things, you say, you know what? I want to become a beginner. And there's things you have said that about, in your life, cheerleading and organizational development and lots of things along the way. And for me, riding unicycles or whatever, we become a beginner, and that means we're open. We're in a growth mindset, open or growth mindset. And from there, we seek out coaching. We're willing to humble ourselves. Being a beginner is no fun all the time because, you have to put in work. You're going to look stupid. Maybe you might fall on your face or, whatever, fail. But that doesn't matter because you're willing to grow, and you seek out coaching or somebody with more knowledge. And therefore you learn the basic moves of that domain or that activity. And that's great because for a lot of activities, just doing the basics is all you need. But then from there, you can even grow. You can become competent at the activity where it's not just about performing the basics, but you can perform that activity pretty stably without any problems. And then there's another level where you can actually teach other people and you can do advanced moves in it. So that's the advanced level of performing the activity. Now, what I'm going to say is, this is a model I've adapted from Marcia Schenk, but really adapted it for our own purposes. And so I say for the purposes of talking about strength, it's kind of our model. And that is that, and there's actually another level higher, mastery. But for what we're talking about, strength is about this level of an activity. It's a very high level, and to get there takes a lot. And you can't do it for most things. And in fact, the theory, one would argue, is that you can't really develop something to the strength level. You've either done it already or you haven't. But if we were to break down how you develop the strength, do you remember the formula? I'll do this in a different color because it's kind of important here. The formula, what's that?
I could take a guess at it, but
Good.
You can say it.
Good. Yeah, well, okay, so to move up this ladder, Don Clifton proposed 3 things. He said, one of those things to move you up the ladder in this activity, whatever the activity is, remember, it could vary. It could be anything. It could be reading. It could be mowing the lawn. It could be giving a speech. I mean, it could be listening. But whatever the activity is, if you can apply your talents to the activity, that's going to move you up the ladder. The other thing, but that's not enough to move you to the level of strength. You also need to apply knowledge related to that activity. That's really key. And you notice I keep repeating that phrase, talents related to that activity. Mm-hmm. Knowledge related to that activity. So I'm not talking about global knowledge. I'm not talking about global talents. I'm talking about, well, your talents are global, but I'm talking about specifically applying them to the activity. Mm-hmm. That's what we're supposed to do with StrengthsFinder results. The StrengthsFinder results are not strengths. They're talents. I'll get to that. The third thing we need to move up the ladder in any activity is we need to realize every activity is made up of steps. And so when we can perform those steps well, that's called skill. So this is the formula that Don Clifton proposes. He says a strength equals, and let me just be clear, when he says strength equals, I also think that's really not a good looking T, but I don't care to fix it, but that's a T, strength. I also think you can replace the word strength with whatever the level of performance. So I could say, I could fill in for the word strength. I could say competence is the degree to which you apply your talent, knowledge, and skills toward an activity. Or a beginner is a very mild degree of applying your talents, knowledge, and skills to the activity. So any thoughts or reactions to this so far? Any thoughts hit you as I talk through that?
Nope.
Okay, so now what I want to say is, well, where does StrengthsFinder fit into all this? And so with StrengthsFinder, and I kind of gave it away already, it's here. StrengthsFinder is just a lexicon or a taxonomy of talents. That's all that is. A taxonomy of talents. And they look at 34 clusters of talents. So each cluster is like achiever or responsibility or learner. What those are really clusters of like 8, 5, 6, 7, 8 talents that relate together. And that's really helpful to know too, because if you have like the learner theme, or you have the achiever theme, and you have the responsibility theme, and you have the learner theme too?
Yes.
Okay, great. So with all of these, what it means is if, let's zoom in here. That's what I love about this Miro board. If we, well, that wasn't what I wanted necessarily. I didn't want to freak out like that. Wow. Everything disappeared. Okay, so if we look at the achiever theme, we might see that it's made up, I don't know exactly the number, but maybe 5 or 6 individual talents. So let's say you scored really high on this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and you scored so-so on this one, and so-so on this one. Well, the chance of you being able to develop in these is pretty high, I think, because they're related to that cluster. And so that's another way to use StrengthsFinder that we haven't even gotten into yet, but it's a very specific way to go into it. But what it is it's a way of looking at 34 talents, but they're not the only ones. And Don Clifton, who created the StrengthsFinder, would be one of the first to tell you that. Well, he would. I mean, he did tell us that. He said there's other ones. You could think of, he used an example of someone he knew that had dyslexia. And he was able to, not to say it was always a benefit, but there were ways that it allowed him to see things differently and solve problems that led to his career, which was a unique career. So there's lots of things that could be used as a talent. I think insomnia, it's a weird way to look at it because I don't think people would really want that. But if you're somebody that doesn't get a lot of sleep anyway, well, that's maybe something that you could put into the development of some activities. It's a weird way to think of it, but I encourage actually that way to look at what is it we can bring to bear? What resources can we bring to a situation? So anyway, so StrengthsFinder is merely a tool to help you identify these, which is one part, a major part, but one part of the formula to move up the ladder, which is all necessary in order for us to produce the outcomes we want. And so really, this is what StrengthsFinder or any of the tools we talk about should be. That's one of our main principles. We call it thriving, because thriving, what it is it's a set of outcomes that indicate growth and success and value, the creation of value or worth, something, progress. All of these things are represented in outcomes or what we call thriving. I call thriving the universal outcome. Because if you ask anybody of whatever background, what do they want? Or what do they care about? And you ask them what they want for what they care about, it's going to be some form of this, some combination of these things. You can add health. All right, so any reaction to any of this?
Nope.
Okay. So what I want to do then with this, Madison, is I want to turn this into sort of like an infographic. And then I want to go and maybe have you make an account and post it to the Facebook group for StrengthsFinder. And maybe we generate some discussions on this. because it helps people understand the difference between a talent and a strength. And a lot of people don't know it. So I think maybe we could talk to Nellie that what to do with next steps with this would be, think about this, see if this was helpful or valuable for you. And then, should we improve it, or is it ready? Could we put it out there like this to get the conversation going or whatnot? So let me stop. I should have probably stopped the recording of all that, but I mean, it's all good.